everyone. Welcome to The Forge Within. This will be episode 3, and today we're going to be talking about the role of self-awareness in leadership success. And we're going to be talking about how it plays a crucial role in your leadership, helping leaders build relationships, make better decisions, and just navigate challenges as we go through our leadership development, so to speak. So today I have a really special guest. I have Command Sergeant Major Macri. How you doing? How's it going? I'm a little nervous, so it's okay. We'll work through it. So, Major, you've been super influential, and I'm not saying this just because a lot of people when they speak to senior leaders that made a really good career, but you've been super influential in my leadership development. I think whenever you arrived to what was it? You were the CSM for 2-6, I believe. That was the first NCOPD I think I had ever sat in where it was not about how to write a counseling statement or how to run a PT test. It was actual. I believe you made us read the book that starts with why, and that totally just opened a whole new world to me. And of course, when trying to apply those lessons that we learned in those NCOPDs, it definitely struggled. Not gonna lie, because implementing that stuff is never done it before can be challenging. But I would say it was great, and I think we read Black Hearts after that. Yeah. And I think after that, I don't know what the next book was. We might have switched
And
out by then.
Leaders Eat Last, I think was
Okay.
the next one.
So I still have those books. They're not actually on my shelf right now. Starts with why it's back here. But yeah, that was opening a whole new world to leadership, and not just how to do the little things as an NCO, but moving forward in just leadership overall. So, but today, definitely talking about self-awareness, of course, making decisions, building relationships. And of course, as leaders ourselves, we go through difficult times. And how do you stay on that path, even though you yourself might feel like you're falling apart or crumbling or under the pressure of just everyday work? So I guess we can start off with, to you, what do you think self-awareness is, and why is it important for leaders to really understand?
I just think it's, to be just simple and not trying to get dictionary with it, man. I just think it's really understanding yourself and how you operate and think and how you react to things, right? I think that in order to truly be a great leader, you have to understand kind of your own, your pet peeves, you know what I mean? How you react to people, and you have to be aware of it, right? I think the problem is a lot of times coming up, I know for me, as a private, you come in the army and like you see a drill sergeant and like that is God, right? Initially, right?
Right.
That's like, oh, that's what every NCO is, right? Because that's all you know. Very quickly you find out when you go to AIT and then you go to, to your unit that there's a whole, there's a whole spectrum of leadership. Um, and what we often do is we end up, at least initially for me, I just started to mimic what I thought was the right leaders, right?
Mhm.
It wasn't about like how I wanted to be a leader, what my leadership style was going to be, right? There wasn't any self-awareness of like, it was just like, hey, yell at people and, be really
Right.
good at your job. And that's what
Mhm.
leadership is. But to me, I think in order to become like a really effective leader, you have to be like emotionally like aware. You have to be in touch with yourself, right? Because there's so many triggers that cause you to react. And sometimes it's not the way you want to react. And if you're not aware of those triggers, aware of those things that can, make you counterproductive,
Mhm.
you end up not being as effective as you truly want to be as a leader. And so I think the self-awareness piece is important. I do think it's hard as hell though to truly be self-aware. It takes time. Like I don't think anyone would come into a leadership position, from a private to a sergeant and truly be self-aware to the point where they're going to be really, really, like amazing from the beginning. I think
Right.
you have to be open to criticism. I think, which I think is part of being self-aware, being able to receive, good and bad, information about yourself. which for me for a while was a hard thing to do. And again, it was probably because I didn't really see my leaders take criticism well, and so I didn't think that was part of it. But in the end, I think the better the better you're in touch with yourself, kind of your emotions, your energy, kind of the do's and don'ts of what you like and what you don't like. It allows you to prepare for those moments where it's like I can see I'm about to go off, and allows you to catch yourself, and then also allows you to react to people differently, right? Every soldier is different. The more self-aware you are, the more you're able to lead soldiers differently based on who they are. Does that make sense? Because
Totally makes sense.
every soldier can't be yelled at. Some are going to have to be talked to and spoken to differently to get the best out of them, if that's what your goal is as a leader. So just some thoughts, initial thoughts.
Totally agree with that. I think one of the biggest steps, at least personally for me, was failing as a leader. I failed, and I might, a lot of people have said you were too hard on, I'm too hard on myself, but I failed miserably as a leader. Again, mimicking what I've always known, yelling and screaming and getting myself all spun up and just really beside myself. And I failed. I failed miserably, and it took. I want to say, as far as my Army career goes, it took me to one of my lowest points, and that's where I had to really, really take a deep look at myself. And like you mentioned, it's a challenge. It's hard to own up to the things that as a leader you failed at, to kind of, and then just look at it and write it down and reflect on it. And that's why I think it's important. I think the Army has really high expectations of people. I mean, that was one of my faults, was I had this high expectation of others, of myself, and I projected it onto the soldiers when they didn't meet those expectations that I had. I mean, yeah, sure, I put it into counseling, but we all know that in reality, people just paste and copy something off of the internet, and there you go. Here's my expectations. When in truth, they never really put their expectations down, which then leads to frustration and failure when those aren't met. And that was something I struggled with, like, really bad. And I've gotten, I would say, Joey six years ago probably is a completely different Joey from the person I am today. And of course, speaking on the comment of how to deal with soldiers on a different level, I think of it this way: is soldiers come in from all walks of life. You don't know their background. You don't know what kind of home they came from, how they respond. And sometimes what I've experienced is yelling at a soldier, they just shut down completely, and you're losing them. And the goal should always be to invest in your soldier, invest in, or for the civilians listening, in your employees, the people that work for you, to bring out the best of them. Because if not, what are you really doing? You're just a manager at that point. So
Yeah,
it's,
I think.
go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, I think that being hard on yourself a lot of times means that you care, right? Because there's a lot of people who are like, this is just what I am, and I'm not going to change. And whatever product I give you or outcome you get is what it is, and we'll move on from that. So that just a lot of it, I'm very critical of myself too. It just, to me, it means you care, right? But there is a point where you have to realize, like, okay, am I just gonna keep being critical, or am I gonna change what it is that I'm judging myself on, right? And so that's where the self-awareness comes in, right? Where you say, okay, this is the seventh time that I've looked back and said, I am messing this up. Then you got to ask yourself, like, what is it that I'm doing that I keep getting the same results? Like, if I keep screaming and no one's reacting, then, maybe it's not them, maybe it's me, maybe it's the screaming, right? And that's where the self-awareness comes in, because leadership is getting the best out of your people. That's the outcome, is to get the best out of them. It doesn't matter if, I have to, be a little softer, or I'd use the word softer, but I mean, just being more relatable, I would just say to each one of my soldiers, right? You could cuss me out. And I tell people all the time when I talk, like, you could cuss me out and I react like I'm roger that. I get motivated, right? Like that doesn't bother me, right? And there's some format soldiers in your formation, like when you yell and scream and you start like saying those speeches and you start going in, like they're like, "Yeah, that's it." And they get pumped up. And like you said, there's some, the moment a curse word comes out of your mouth, they stop listening to you and you've lost them, right? And the goal is to get as many people working towards the same goal with the same amount of energy and motivation as possible, right? And if that means I have to address, if I got 99 people in my formation and I got to address each one of them differently, then as a leader, that's my job, right? But the self awareness comes in, right? And emotional intelligence, right? To know that, hey, first, I need to know that I can't keep leading this way, right? And I have some problems that I need to work through when it comes to my expression of things, right? And then understanding other people, the emotional intelligence comes in where you now say, okay, I got 50% of this unit that reacts a certain way, and then I got the other 50% that reacts different. Now, how do I lead both at the same time and get the same results? And that's where you learn to hone your skills. It took me, man. I mean, I'm telling you, man, it took me till about 6 months into my first time job, my first time position, man, to realize I could get the same results without being as out there and screaming and
Right.
yelling and animated. Right? I'm still animated. It's just who I am. I talk with my hands and it's just kind of who I am. But it took me a while, man. You know what I mean? And um, it's not something, like I said, man. You'll learn it as you start to go through your career. Like you said, 6 years ago, you were completely different than you are now, and that's growth, man. And you should be proud of that. And anyone else who changes who they are and realizes that you can still have the mentality that you had, but you got to learn how to express that thought in a different way, right?
Mhm.
And you can say the same thing 20 million different ways and get the same result. It's still the same point, right? Like standards and discipline hasn't dropped. It's just how I choose to get those standards and discipline has changed, right? The method in which I do it has changed because I've started to become self-aware and saying, hey, some of these things I'm doing, me personally are, counterproductive. They're not good for the formation, right? I might get I might get compliance and people are going to do what I say because I'm the leader, but it's only going to be half-assed, man. I'm going to
Yeah.
get 80% of them. Like, yeah, 80% is a passing grade, man, but I'm missing out on the other 20% that I could have got if I hadn't committed to the organization. And that's what the difference, I think, is like when you're self-aware and you understand who you are, what makes you tick, what triggers you, when you need to take that break and say, yo, I'll be right back. I'm gonna go to the office, right? Or hey, I'm gonna go work out real quick.
Yeah.
You know how to counter those things, and then you come back and you're much more effective. You get 100% out of everybody in your formation. Yeah, so,
Absolutely. That's again, yeah, it definitely does take time, kind of seeing, just reflecting on my own self where kind of me as a leader, my own organization. You mentioned like eventually you have to be aware of the fact that at some point you got to realize this, I'm getting the same results or not the results I want over and over and over again. And that was something I realized. I was like, something's not right here. And then it dawned on me, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the problem. And that was a tough pill to swallow. And I think that's something that a lot of leaders, uh, I'm not speaking for everyone, just really for myself, but I think some leaders do struggle with facing the reality that maybe they're not as where they should be. And it does take a lot of time. But I would say, I guess my follow-up question to all this is this something that people are born with, or is it something they can develop over time? Obviously, we've kind of hit on that a little bit, but say just the average individual, um, where do they begin? I guess would be.
I'll tell you my personal thought on it. I think some of it has to do with the environment that you're raised in, right? So I think I don't have an opinion on whether you're born a leader or you're born with something like this kind of trait or attribute. But I do think that, there are people who join the military who've been through things in their upbringing, right? In their,
Mhm.
childhood and whatever that
Right.
make them a little better to start off soldier, right? To
Right.
make them a little bit better to become in this profession, right? To become a soldier. It doesn't mean they will, right? Because some people
Mhm.
can adapt regardless, right? Um, because some people can't control triggers and things like that. But I do think that based off of your environment that you grew up in, how you were raised, right? I do think that gives you a base, a foundation of some of these things, like some self-awareness,
Mhm.
leadership ability, the ability to listen and be disciplined and not react,
Right.
to it, or vice versa, right? To where you react to discipline to counter it, right?
Right.
So I don't think that you're born with it. I do think that the more situations you're put in where you have to start to look at yourself,
Mhm.
you start to develop it, right? When you have to start realizing like, okay, you know, and failure is when you talk about self-awareness, like failure is probably the best lesson
Absolutely.
for self-awareness, right? I mean, it's probably the best lesson for a lot of things, but um, it's a great lesson, right? Because you can see quickly at least me, and I've been in almost 29 years now, right? So and I've been a leader for, I've only been in a gunner position for 18 months of my 29 years, right? So when I retire, I have been a leader for, you know, 28 years, basically 28 and a half years, right? So
Mhm.
having been in the position where you're watching and leading soldiers for that long, you get to see quickly how how little self-awareness or how much self-awareness soldiers have because they'll either blame somebody for a
Mhm.
failure or they will look internally and say, man, I could have done this better, or okay, I didn't understand that. Teach me where did I go wrong? Like when someone leads with something and say, hey, what can I do better? Normally there's some sort of self-awareness there.
Right.
When someone says, oh, if that person didn't do this, or if I would have got one more, right,
Mhm.
and blames it on that, there's probably very little self-awareness,
Right.
right? And you just pick up on that, right? It's one of the things. That's why most of the time for me, and it's something I learned early on, is like when something's complete, like I want critique. Like
Mhm.
I need to know, like, hey, tell me, like, I understand it was successful or we did a good job, but I need to know, what could I have done better, right? And if someone says, "Hey, man, it was perfect, you did well, everything was good," then I'm okay with that. But I don't mind receiving critique.
Right.
So I think, I do think throughout your career, you have to have people who are not scared to tell you that you did good, man, but here's some things you can work on.
Mm.
And that builds self-awareness. And I think when people see that honesty in people, when you receive that honest feedback, I think people appreciate it a lot more than you lying to them and telling them they're the best thing ever.
Yeah. So I'll just follow with the feedback question. Do you think today's like time now, NCOs today, or even people in general, you think they're really good at receiving feedback, or is that just kind of one of those things where receiving criticism is kind of one of those bad things?
I don't think that anyone has truly changed, man. I know people talk about like the new generation and like the new this.
Mhm.
I always tell people like my NCO was probably saying that about me, man. When I came in, like, oh, softer and, new
Right.
generation, different mindset. Like, I truly think that if someone is being honest with NCO, like, listen, I just talked to the NCO Academy, the ALC, SLC classes, all of them,
Mhm.
all the different ones that we have in session right now. I'm always very honest with them about what I think the role of NCO is and how I think as NCOs we're losing some of our power. And here's where I think we're messing up.
Right.
90% of them, man, nod their head up and down, like, yeah, you're right. You're right. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
I think they're good at receiving it. The problem is once someone gives them the feedback, how much follow up do you give that person?
Right.
Because naturally, human is going to go back to what they're comfortable doing. And I think that's where the problem lies. Like if I give you a counseling or quarterly counseling, and then I don't talk to you again to your final NCO, I'm not going to change because the leader has to drive the change in the person they're leading. You have to
Hmm.
drive that change, right? I can't make you do things, but if I'm constantly pointing things out to you, I think you become better at receiving the feedback if I'm constantly giving you feedback. If I
Right.
give it to you once every 3 months, you have by the time you walk out my office, man, like you're not thinking about it anymore. Like you got other things to do, man. Soldiers to lead,
Hmm.
you got maybe some personal issue or family problems. You know, you might be PCS in next year. Like you're not thinking about that, right? So
Right.
half of the time I tell people the feedback is only good as the person giving it and following up with it. Because if
Right.
you give it once and expect someone to change, then you're being an idiot. Like that's what I like. It's my problem. That's a me problem. The fact that I just told you one time and I've never come back to check back up on you or talk to you about it or say,
Right.
hey, what actions are we taking to fix this, man? That's my thought. I don't think that anyone, and again, it goes back to everyone's a different individual.
Hmm.
I think you might have moments where you have a group of people in your platoon or battery, man, that take take criticism amazing, and then
Yeah.
a year later, you get a whole new batch of people, and half of them might not be good at taking criticism. I don't think it's a generational thing. I think it's an individual person thing, and that's what goes back to the leader. The leader has to be able to identify
Hmm.
and say, yo, this person is not really good at taking criticism. I could see that.
Right.
And when I said that, their whole face turned red and they wanted to cuss me out. Okay. So now I'm going to have a conversation with you right then and there and say, hey, did you not like what I just told you? Like
Hmm.
we're going to talk about it. But
Right.
that that's a leadership skill that
Mhm.
not a soldier taking criticism skill. That's a leadership skill that has to be, worked on. And that's my thoughts
Okay.
on it, though. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say I would agree with that. I think I would add to that as someone who usually receives feedback because I know in my personal life or just even my career, there have been people that have told me, "Hey, you're not doing so well. You're not doing this," and I would get kind of defensive. I'd put up my
Mhm.
walls and start, "Yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. You're an idiot. Whatever. You can't even lead yourself." What makes you think you're qualified to tell me what I'm doing and just totally disregard what that individual said. I guess what I was trying to get at is kind of receiving, being open to feedback and really taking it back. I think it's a two-way street, right? The leadership should, like you said, follow up, but the individual also should take some ownership of themselves.
Mhm.
And I think that's something that's really hard for people. It wasn't until I read a book by I believe it was uh, Jocko Wilkins, Extreme Ownership.
Yep.
And I read that book and
Good
I was
book.
going through it, I was just blown away. And that's something I kind of adopted to myself. I took out of it what I wanted, and then I started applying that to not just my military career, but to my life.
Yeah, to life.
To life. And it was extremely helpful in understanding that my decisions in life and my decisions were mine. And the bad things that happened to me or something bad happened in my life, I had to own it. And instead of, blaming someone else or using some excuse or at the end of the day, I like to think it's my life. I'm going to make the choices that I make. And, whether they come with consequences or
That's
rewards,
right.
I have to own those. So that's why I was kind of asking about the feedback question was it's a two-way street, I think.
No, I agree. I agree. I think it's definitely a two-way street. I think my perspective is though, and this is just me, I guess, as the leader,
Mhm.
it's also your responsibility. to make sure they develop that self-awareness,
Right.
right? So yes, you're 100% right. Like the person has to be willing to take it in and be okay with the criticism, right? You have to be
Right.
able to receive, right? Because you got the leader, the led communication, right? You got the situation, right? You got all of those things leadership wise. But I also think that if you're my soldier and I have you for 2 years and I see that you have a weakness, something that's not finely tuned, like your ability to be self-aware or take criticism,
Right.
I got to not be frustrated with that. And I have to be able to try to develop that in you. Now, once you
Right.
leave my footprint or, I'm no longer your leader, if you haven't changed by then, I can send you away and tell you, when you go PCS and say, hey, man, this is some things you really need to work on, man.
Hmm.
If you're still seeing some issues with you being able to receive critique and take it in and change what you do. So I agree. It's definitely a two-way street because first the leader has to be confident enough to give it, which
Hmm.
I think is a worse problem than someone receiving it.
Right.
I've seen more people not be able to give the right critique and be honest with their subordinates than subordinates not be able to receive it.
Right.
I think subordinates are asking for it, and I think people have a hard time giving it because I think the mentality of a leader has gone to we've almost bought into like you got to be kinder or gentler.
Hmm.
So leaders have now said I can't really say that to somebody when yes you can just say it respectfully, and if you're honest about it and
Right.
it's respectful, there's nothing wrong with it. But people have gone to the point like I'm not able to tell them that because they're gonna file a
Hmm.
complaint or they're gonna, hey man,
Right.
honest about being critical about something and not taking it to, off to an EO or IG problem, man,
Right.
that's a whole nother lane we're talking about. But just giving you feedback on your performance has nothing to do with it as long as I don't inject specific words and things into it, man. So
Right.
I think, I've seen it to where leaders lack self-awareness on their ability to be honest, vices a subordinate not being able to take the criticism.
I agree. 100%. And and something I've struggled with, and you kind of answered one of my questions I was going to follow up is why do you think leaders have such a hard time being honest with their subordinates? And um, it was something that I've experienced, and unfortunately, I feel like I'm talking about myself too much, but it's just my experience. I don't like talking about other people's experience because I'm not them. But there were times where I wasn't meeting I wasn't meeting the marks that someone had laid out for me. And I guess in my mind, if you haven't said anything to me, then I'm doing good and I'm doing okay.
Exactly right.
I'm not doing anything wrong. But in the leader's mind, they're like, this person's just not cutting it. They're not doing what I want them to do. And then when it comes to sitting down and talking about it, they're like, well, you did good. It wasn't great, but you did good. Okay. Why does my evaluation look like this?
Yeah,
And then
exactly.
and then that just kind of breeds frustration and contempt for the relationship there. It definitely, yeah, being honest with people is almost like a lost art in terms of giving constructive criticism, receiving constructive criticism as well. So, and I would agree that people are craving it. They want it. They want to
Yeah.
know how to get better on some level.
I don't think anyone joined the army, man. I think initially you joined it for what you joined for, right? Like I joined for
Right.
college money. Once I understood what being a soldier meant and I bought in, and I've started to live the life of a soldier and started to understand it,
Mhm.
you know, I, you know, I always wanted that feedback. Like it was like, yo, I gotta get better. I gotta get better for my
Right.
team. I gotta get better for myself. When I started to, when I had a child, I was like, I gotta do better for my son. Like there was always something where I was like, I know I can be better, right? And it doesn't mean I didn't have failures and hardships but there's to me, the leader has to be, again, I'll go back to self-awareness. I never had a problem being honest with people, right? As you know, right? So like, I've always been able to just be blunt and honest and candid about whatever it is that we're talking about. You know what
Right.
I'm saying? So it was never a problem for me. You know what I mean? Because my
Mhm.
first team chief, my first NCO, he was straightforward, man. But he was like, like I tell people, like that was, I understood what tough love was immediately with him,
Right.
right? Took care of me like crazy. He was an amazing, amazing, like, you know, soldier's leader. But man, he didn't play,
Right.
like he was, hey, you suck at this. You need to study that. You need to do this. Like, and I learned that quickly and I mimicked it, and that was a good thing to mimic. Like some people don't have that. Some people have the leader, like what you're saying, where they're quiet and they don't really lead and they're like, oh, you're doing good. Like, just keep it up. Like,
Right.
and then they grow up to be that person, right? Until someone tells them and looks them in their face and say, hey, man, you're really not that good. Like, let me show you how you could be better. Now, how I take that when someone tells me that at that point is
Right.
going to be on me, right?
Mhm.
And that's to your point, like, the person has to be willing to take that advice. But I do think, as you start to go, you start to go through your career, you know, you have to start being able to be open and honest as a leader, and that's the
Right.
leader's responsibility. And someone has to tell someone, like, someone, if I see leaders who are not open or being honest with their subordinates, and I'm just happen to be there or catch it, I'm like, hey, like, is that really what you wanted to say? You know? And if you have I think what we fail in the army to do is teach people how to communicate.
Mm.
I
Very
think
true.
we instantly think that because, oh, that's a sergeant, they must know how to counsel a soldier,
Right.
right? We make these assumptions that because I have some rank on my chest, the knowledge and the abilities that come with the rank are automatic. Like, it's like I put the rank and I get like the energy from all NCOs that flow into me the moment I get promoted, and now I know
Right.
everything an NCO is supposed to know, right? And we assume that. We're like, oh, that's a staff sergeant. They got it. He knows what to
Right.
tell that private. Well, we don't verify that NCO truly understands what it means to have an open and honest conversation, right? We just assume it, and
Mhm.
then sometimes we wonder, like, hey, like, why did that happen? Because
Right.
that NCO had no clue how to truly have a conversation. So I think we have to teach that piece of it, and that's self-awareness on the Army's part. The Army has to be aware of themselves to say, hey, rank has nothing to do with leadership ability.
Right.
Right.
And because you can be, I, yeah, you can be any rank and be a leader. It doesn't
That's
matter.
right.
It doesn't matter what your rank is, and that's something that I'm really starting to realize and grow into. And yeah,
It
it's
also
starting to.
takes self-awareness though, Joey. Like,
Right.
my ability as a first sergeant to look at a specialist and realize that that specialist is a better leader than that staff sergeant and give that specialist responsibility and be
Mhm.
okay with that. That's self-awareness, man. It's right. You have to be aware and say, hey, I I have to let go of this, like, this thought of like, NCOs are the leaders,
Right.
and be open to the fact that there might be a private that is going to run circles around this sergeant. And
Mhm.
I gotta tap into that knowledge and that skills and those abilities of that damn soldier and be okay with that soldier helping the unit get better instead of just taking orders and executing, right?
Right.
Because it's about the team in the end, right?
Mhm. Yeah. And I have a great example that I have a few specialists that work in my shop, and they fill NCO positions that are usually held by NCOs. And while that's not, I wouldn't say, that's not the traditional leadership. It's not like they have soldiers underneath them, but they interact with the units on a daily basis, and they're constantly helping other soldiers, even NCOs, to kind of navigate whatever section they're running, and they're doing a phenomenal job. And it took, at first, it was a little shaky because it's like, oh, Sergeant, what do I do? I had to sit them down. I was like, look, you're filling an NCO position, right? Your job is to assist, help, whatever you can do to help these people out. I need you to start thinking, mind, turn that switch from I need to be told what to do to now I'm taking initiative and starting doing my job and then helping others complete whatever they need to do, whether it's schools, DTMS, DTS, all these other programs that are usually not really handled very much at the line level. So they come up to us and they ask us for help. So we're constantly, and I have a few specialists that they're just knocking it out of the park. Like they're doing really great. And again, it's not just, and that's something I kind of had to realize was just because I'm not leading soldiers in a formation, platoon sort of traditional
Right.
way. I'm influencing and still teaching people and still guiding them along the way. Um, and I really appreciate that for myself. But I kind of want to go back to a question. I had a question kind of on the honesty portion. So, do you think that a lot of NCOs are afraid to be honest with people because maybe they lack or they don't feel like they're meeting the standards themselves? And kind of, how can I tell you what to do, or how can I critique you when internally I know I'm not where I'm supposed to be
Yeah.
in terms of the Army standard, of course, what we have, but even further beyond that? You think that plays
Yeah.
a part into
I think it
being
plays a
honest?
huge role. I think it plays a huge role, right? Like
Mhm.
leaders have to be confident. It just comes with it, right? Like leaders have to be confident, and you don't have to be loud and out obnoxious to be
Mhm.
confident. Like you could walk around and people can feel that aura, man. Like, oh,
Right.
that person, like, right, like, and then when you
Mhm.
speak, people listen, right? Like you don't, but you have to be confident and you have to be competent, right?
Yes.
No one is going to sit there and, you can tell me once, I'm going to respect you when you step in front of me because I don't know you yet. And
Right.
when you open your mouth and something comes out of your mouth that makes no sense or just isn't, people know. Like we might nod our head up and down and say, Roger, Sergeant, but then we're gonna go do what we know needs to happen.
Mhm.
And like we're probably not gonna listen to you anymore, right? So, I agree. I think that there is a point, when it goes into the development. Like
Right.
someone should be telling that leader, right? I should be able to, if I'm a first sergeant or a platoon sergeant and I have NCOs under me, right? If I'm not observant enough to see that this person doesn't have it and either do the right developmental piece to it and, not just counseling, but like the leadership part of it, right? And try to tell them and give them some guidance and some criticism on it. Say, hey, here's what you need to do to step up, right? And then if that is, I I have a hard time with like, when I see someone complaining about a platoon sergeant and then they're keeping them in that position.
Mhm.
Ah, hey man,
Yes.
yeah, like you have the ability to do a release for cause, like,
Right.
but no one wants to do that. Like no one, like listen, in the army, the average rank of retirement, 20 years is staff sergeant. That's the average rank, man. If you make sergeant first class, you are above average, man, in the army.
That,
I'm just being honest with you. Like, think about it, right? Listen, you know, 1.25% of the Army makes the rank of Sergeant Major. 1.25% of the Army makes it to Sergeant Major. Do you understand what I'm trying to tell you?
that's a pretty small percentage there.
Right? So when you make it to E8 or E7, man, you are doing pretty damn good, right? Some people have maxed out their full potential, man, at a certain, and we have to be honest about saying, hey, you probably are really good at being an ops sergeant, you know, and
Mhm.
you can plan and you can think critically, and we need you here. You just ain't the right person to be in front of soldiers and be a platoon sergeant, right?
Right.
I've watched you. You suck at it. I've given you advice. Not just say you suck, but like, hey, I've given you guidance. I've told you
Right.
what you need to fix. You're having a hard time becoming this person. And it takes a
Mhm.
special person to lead. That's why there's only so many of those positions in a formation, right?
I
You know what
agree.
I mean? So, I just tell people like we have to do a better job of managing that talent too, right? Because
Right.
after a while, whose fault does it become if I see that Joey is a terrible platoon sergeant, and no matter what advice I give that person, they don't have the confidence and they don't have the competence to lead soldiers.
Right.
And after a while, whose fault is that? Is that your fault? Or is it my fault for keeping you in that damn position for 3 years?
That's
I would tell you it's my fault.
right.
It's my fault because I've seen you're not going to change. And that goes back to talent management. And people think that like HRC is supposed to do talent management. We suck at doing talent management down in the battery level.
Right.
And then you complain about HRC not sending you the right people, right? Or, hey,
Hmm.
talent management, why am I going here? Hey, man, don't worry about that. Fix your own house first,
Right.
right? Manage the talent in your own house, and then we can talk about other things. But, you know, I just think that the confidence piece is key, Joey. You 100% right. Like if I'm walking around, right, and I got pointed sideburns, right, and I'm not allowed to have pointed sideburns, but you walking around because you went to the club on, Friday, you got your hair cut, so you could have your pointed sideburns at the club that night, and then you don't shave them flat come Monday, right? And I'm just making a simple thing, right? I'm
Right.
just something simple, right? You know, like you go in there, man, and you're wrong. You're probably not going to tell someone else they're wrong because that person, that private, might know that you're wrong too and
True.
fire right back at your ass,
And
right?
yeah.
And that's where I think the knowledge and the confidence piece comes, right? Because if you don't know if you're completely right about something, you're probably not going to say something.
And that's very true. And I can speak on that
And
from
that
my
I've,
own
I've done it
experience.
myself. I've done it myself. I'm like, man, I don't quite know the regulation on that.
Right.
I'm gonna have to walk by this because I don't really know, right? And then even now, man, I don't walk around studying regulations, man. Like I have to go back and look things up, right?
Right.
And then and I do the same thing. Just being honest with you, like I do the same thing where I am like, man, I know they have a first sergeant and a platoon sergeant and a sergeant major and like three sergeants major between me and that soldier. Somebody had to see this person this morning. Like, you know what I mean? And so
Mm-hmm.
so I don't walk around like looking to correct people because I am hoping, which is not a great plan, that there is some leader that saw him this morning. Like when I see soldiers at the gym and PTs with freaking logos on their socks. I'm like, what are we doing? Like, I gotta walk around and stop my workout, tell the person, you can't have logos on your socks showing on your ankle. Or that ankle socks is supposed to come above the ankle bone and not be no shows,
Right.
right? Yeah, come on. But
What are
that's
we
the
what are we doing
frustration.
here?
That's the like I'm stopping, you know, things to fix your socks, right? And there's times that I'll be honest, man, that I'm like, you know what, man? I'm in the middle of a good workout, bro. I'll just hope that there's an NCO that sees it and fixes it. That's just being
Yeah.
truly honest. Like there are times where I will walk past it and people can say what they want about it. But if I stopped to correct someone at lunch every time I saw something, I would never eat my lunch.
Yeah. You got to draw the line somewhere for your
Uh,
own.
blatant and crazy things, it's like, yeah, you know, but there are times, man, and that's just probably a weakness I have too, where I'm like, I just want to eat lunch, man. I'll literally stare at my lunch and not look up
Hey, you
every
got to
time
put
I'm
the
at the
blinders
PX
on.
here. Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I'm, I'm
you
just
know,
here for one thing. No,
just
I totally get that.
being completely honest and transparent on that.
Yeah, same. That's kind of one of those things that kind of I reverse like I think to myself, man, is this? I don't know enough about this topic to say something, so I'll have to go back and look at it,
Yeah. And
or
I do. I mean, I go and look it up, and then if I see
hmm
that soldier next time, which is rare, because AIT basic training, like, I'm
yeah,
not hanging
hmm
out at the PX, but, which is rare. But when I do, then I do correct them. You know what I mean? If it was something I didn't know. And
But
if I'm not in a rush or something, I will,
mhm.
I'll be there and be picking people off like, hey, fix that. Hey, yeah,
Yeah.
but
And I've actually corrected people and have been wrong. I think when the new female hair standards came out and, the ponytail, and of course after so many years of seeing one way and then all of a sudden it changes, and
yeah,
it's just kind of that indoctrination kicks in. It's like, ooh, and then you'll say something like, "Well, Sergeant, it changed." I'm like, "It did? Oh, okay. Well, yeah, let me go back and school myself, educate myself on what's going on because I missed something." And instead of, I had enough self awareness to be, okay, I was wrong. That's okay. It happens. I'm a human being. I'm not gonna, you know, blow the soldier up because they made me feel like like incompetent. But that was I'm owning this. Let me go back and figure out what I missed here. And I've seen it happen where soldiers will correct whoever's correcting them, and they're like, no, you can't. This is not correct.
yeah.
And
I normally
just
thank the soldier. If they tell me something and if I correct them or I say something and they say this is what it's changed to, I'll tell them thank you. I wasn't aware of it. I don't have
right,
any problem having the humility to sit there
same.
and be like, okay, okay, thanks. I'll go look that up. Right.
That's what I usually say. Taught me something today. I stand corrected. Let me go fix myself. And
Right.
usually that's the end of it. And I just move on. So just kind of moving this along here. We talked about identifying triggers and kind of how those kind of self-reflecting and figuring out what were some of your triggers as you were coming up through
Yeah.
your career.
That's a great question, man. So first, I will tell you this. I I'll go back and kind of tell, and I know you've heard it, kind of my story and things like that, right? But
Mhm.
I'm on my third marriage, right? So
Right.
I've been divorced twice, had my son with my first wife, and I was married twice in 6 years, right? So there was a lot of debt in those
Hmm.
6 years that ended up building up, right? Deployed, I deployed I deployed when my first wife was like 7.5 months pregnant, and they didn't do late deployments or you
Right.
didn't, there wasn't an emergency need to come back, right? My son was
Hmm.
born 45 days after I got to Iraq, and I didn't see him for the first time until I went on R&R. He was 6 months old, and then that was for 2 weeks, and I got back, and he was a year old. You know what I mean? So I
Oh.
missed the whole
Hmm.
first year of his life, and then right after I got back, I didn't think I was changing, right?
Right.
And nobody talked about PTSD and things like that, right? It was '03, right? It was the beginning of the
Right.
Iraq War, right? So I didn't think anything was wrong with me at the time, and I didn't think that I was changing. I had a couple events over there, you know what I mean? But you
Hmm.
learn, really, really good soldiers can compartmentalize
Right.
really well. Um, you're able to like shut things off in during the mission that allow you to continue to think and focus, right? And it's a great
Right.
trait to have. It is a great skill to have
Hmm.
when you're at war. When you're back home, though, it is not a great skill to have.
Right.
I I did not know how to shut that off, the compartmentalization. So when things started to get bad at home, on the divorce and then the marriage, another marriage, and then a deployment, 6 months, 8 months after that marriage started, and right, had gone for a whole year, like
Right.
come back, issues with that, like I would any issues, any problems, like I wouldn't. There was no stuff. I didn't take any accountability.
Right.
Like there was no self awareness, man, zero at that point. And I was assigned first class at that point, right? I ended up having to move in with my friend, live in his son's room for like 8 months. I had to file for bankruptcy. This is as assigned first class. Now, when I go to work every day, I'm an
Right.
animal. Like that part, I compartmentalize all of that personal stuff and I show up to work and I'm, drunk at work, you know what I mean? But no one
Right.
if they knew, they didn't say nothing. I still, scorching these on PT and run 12 and
Mhm.
13-minute miles and, you know, twisted as hell, man. But every night I'm drinking a bottle a night, going to sleep, 1 in the morning, waking up at 5, you know,
Mhm.
just that repetition, man. And I started to go in depression. So,
Right.
you know, um, it was going on for months and months and months, man. And then one day was sitting there. It was 2:43 in the morning, man. I know the exact time. I remember what the clock looks like. There was about an empty bottle of Crown on one side of the clock and a half empty on the other side of the clock. Oh, and I knew my friend. I knew where a gun was. And I started thinking about my son, and I wasn't thinking about being there for my son. I started thinking about like, man, $400,000 is a good amount of money,
Right.
right? Like
Mhm.
there was nothing that kept me on this earth, man. And then I tell people I'm not religious, but I am spiritual. And I just felt like my father, who had passed away in '99. I just felt like my father kind of reached down, man, and like touched me. I could just hear him like say, "Hold on," and like it was like instant clarity, man. Like it was like almost like an instant sober moment. I don't know if anyone's ever had that type of moment, but it was like
Right.
instant sober. And I don't know what, call it military training, call it,
Mhm.
going to all the safety days, right?
Right.
Military one. So it's popped in my head, man. And I made the phone call, 2:43 that morning. It was a Sunday morning. Called him, on the phone with him for 20 minutes.
Right.
They got me an appointment. I don't know who they called on a Sunday, but they were able to get me an appointment for that Monday. Um, and I started 12 weeks of therapy, man, from that moment, man. Every Wednesday at 1300, I will go. My first line leader, Colonel retired Ray Solis. He was the S3 at the time. I was an ops NCO waiting for
Mhm.
4-5, Echo 4-5 or 3-3 to get back from their CRAM deployment. I had just gotten back from the mid team at that time, and yeah, and I started. That to me, man, is when I started
Mhm.
to learn self awareness, started to learn my triggers, right?
Mhm.
And one of the things that I realized that I really had a trigger with was in the military was that I could not stand leaders who would not listen to their subordinates when their subordinates were right.
Right.
It was a trigger for me because something
Mhm.
happened downrange, you know, where I had to lay out the entire piece of how this wasn't the Avengers' role to
Right.
do. Or this was on the initial push up to Iraq from Kuwait
Mhm.
and say, hey, this isn't our role. Our capabilities doesn't allow us to really do this role. Like you're gonna leave
Mhm.
us basically open. We can be killed. Like there's nothing that
Right.
right. Like I'm laying all of this stuff out for this leader who's a very, very high ranking leader. Um, and he's like, I don't care. Go do this convoy.
Wow.
And it just so happened, we come off of the bridge to head down, to escort another vehicle that got lost in our convoy back down, to a checkpoint. And we come off of this turn, about 400 Iraqis sitting there, like, like
Wow.
stopping cars, like pulling, I guess, Saddam supporters out and beating them and like just, right. And it's just three
Mhm.
vehicles, two Avengers and a 5-ton.
Wow.
And, you know, um, and we're rolling, man, and like they're like raiding this rice truck and like beating people and and I'm the convoy commander, even though I was the lowest ranking person in that convoy.
Mhm.
I just kind of take charge and get some guidance, but we had done some things to Avenger to secure it a little bit better when it came to the doors, but you
Mhm.
could feel people like trying to pull the doors open and you know
Right.
I just knew like we didn't have enough rounds and I just said, hey man, unless you feel threatened, right? Like just don't stop the trucks, keep rolling, keep the Avenger
Right.
turret moving, don't let people reach in, whatever the case might be. But at that moment, you just know that you could die. Like there's
Right.
nothing that's going to stop 500, 300, whatever it was. It was definitely in the hundreds of people with weapons, right, to
Right.
kill 6 people, right? There's nothing you could do, right? And
Mhm.
it worked out, man. But that moment stayed in my mind, like still in my mind, right? Like,
Right.
and that's when I started to, that's when I started to have a trigger with incompetent or leaders who don't listen to soldiers,
Mm.
right? And so that's a
Right.
trigger. That was one of the triggers for me in my military career, which molded who I was as a leader, right?
Right.
Which, I always ask people's opinion. I always say, hey, what are your thoughts, right? Like, hey, how would you solve this? Or, hey, how would you do this? I might have
Mm.
a thought in my mind, right?
Right.
But in the end, I always try to include my people, but that was a huge trigger for me, right? And so as I grew up in the army, I used to always say, like, I'm not going to do that to soldiers. Like,
Right.
I'm going to give them a voice at a minimum, right? I might not agree with them, and I might in the end have to tell them this is what we're going to do,
Mhm.
but I'm at least going to hear you out, right? If I
Right.
have the chance. There's moments when a leader just has to make a decision, and I don't have time to hear your opinion. But if there's time, we're going to have a conversation about it. But all those things is what kind of drove me into the depression, right? And the PTSD.
Mhm.
And like, but I was able to compartmentalize a lot of things. And like,
Right.
I still deal with it now, right? So like for me, I go to behavioral health now, man. I've been in behavioral health since 2010, bro. I've been
Right.
in behavioral health for 15 years, man. It hasn't stopped me. I'm the regimental
Mhm.
CSM, right, of the branch, right?
Right.
It hasn't
Man.
stopped me from progressing, right? I
Right.
use it because to go back to self-awareness, I know I need it. I
Right.
am aware of where, right? I know when the triggers come for depression to hit.
Mm.
And I've learned that through counseling. I've learned that through behavioral health, going to counseling. Like I've learned exactly, like I can feel it. And I'll tell my wife, like, yo, I need to like go to the gym or like, hey, I got to
Right.
schedule an appointment. Like there's a moment coming up, whether it's a stressful moment at work or something personal, where I know that this is going to drive me back into depression.
Right.
And that self-awareness is key, bro. Like that's the key. And that's why I tell
Mhm.
people, like, you know, don't, therapy isn't an excuse to not perform.
Right.
Therapy is to be the reason you perform better,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, what 100% agree with that.
And so, you know, you learn triggers through hard experiences, but you only learn them if you're self-aware enough
Mhm.
to accept that as a problem. Okay, this moment, like even when I'm in meetings now and I hear like, you know, somebody will make a really good point and back it up with facts and you hear a leader like no matter what, it's like, no, no, it's like, oh, like I have to catch myself.
Right.
Right. And I know the big picture. Like I'm in the positions where like I like so when I was a younger soldier, I probably didn't understand it. So when someone made a decision, you're just like, I was stupid, right? But you
Mhm.
don't know like the second, third, fourth order effects, or you don't know the
Right.
big picture, right? You just know how it affects you in the moment, and that's why it's
Mhm.
stupid, right? But as you move up, man, you start to see the big picture, and there's a lot of
Right.
decisions that are made that aren't, may not be the best decisions, based on facts and second, third order effects, and people have their
Mhm.
opinions on what they want to do and nothing's going to change their mind,
Mhm.
and that is the type of leaders that trigger me.
Right. Yeah.
But
I can see
anyway,
that.
yeah, yeah. So,
I I guess for me, just I've maybe not for the same reasons, but have dealt with those things myself, depression, anxiety. There for a while, even when I was a young staff sergeant, um, I lived a very self-destructive life in terms. Sure, I'd go to work and I was mediocre. Yeah, I was there, but my personal life was a mess, and it was hard. I had a hard time um, not bringing my work home and then not bringing my personal life to work. If I couldn't separate the two.
You couldn't compartmentalize.
I could not. I was very much, different in that sense. I could not. And, and I went personally, I went through some tough times with when I first got to as an instructor, I think in 2015 at Fort Sill, me and my ex-wife, we split, and I literally, my son was probably a year and a half old. And that was one of the hardest times for me. And then still having to go to work and still be that example for the soldiers. And I fell apart, and it was tough. And then I think for our branch in air defense, we're constantly gone. Constantly leaving, and then trying to repair those relationships with our families. My son dealing with, I made uh, some some bad decisions along the way there, and really found myself in some, much like yourself, in debt. I thought to myself, I'm a whole staff sergeant, and I'm volunteering to march the soldiers to chow so I can eat, because sometimes they'll let you eat there and not pay anything, which was great. And I appreciate those DFAC ladies, but I was drinking. I was in a bad way, and then of course learning how the depression, the anxiety, all those things just really affected me. And much like yourself, I think it was 2019. I broke down, and I just went to behavioral health. I had to. It was just, I didn't know what else to do. I had reached my breaking point with not just my work life, but my personal life. It was just a mess. Um, and I left, therapy helped. It was great. I think what really, and I've said this before in a couple episodes prior to this, is that when I went to the Equal Opportunity School, or the EOA school, you spend like the first month sitting there, and you sit in a small group and you talk about yourself and your feelings. I left that assignment hating. I was bitter. I was frustrated, hated everything about the Army. I hated soldiers on a personal level. It was just an experience, a point in my life where I look back on it now, and I was like, wow, I can't believe I actually went there with that. But after going through that and really talking it out and realizing that with other seniors, because the EOA school is usually like E7 or above,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing other seniors, other peers, and they're talking about their lives and their struggles, that's when it dawned on me, I'm not alone in this.
That's right.
Like, I'm not the only one struggling with life, marriages, my family, a lot of people, a lot of civilians, and even my own family, they don't quite understand the sacrifices that we do in the military, how, and like, we sacrifice that time with our families, our kids. I try to spend as much time with my kids, and sometimes I'm hard on myself. I have a great relationship with my son, my daughter, who was from another, so I have two baby mamas. I don't have a great relationship with her because I've missed probably like 80% of her life just being
Right.
gone. That's been really hard on me, but kind of, again, being self-aware and understanding those feelings, kind of allowing myself to feel and to kind of, I guess, accept them, and then go from there and say, hey, I will control what I can control, and what I can't control, I leave to God. Much like yourself, I'm not a religious person, but very spiritual. And that's kind of the premise of this whole podcast to begin with, is really finding yourself and growing from your painful experiences. And then, of course, trying to lead through, like, that was going to be one of my follow-up questions, is what kind of advice would you give to leaders listening to this now, is that when you're going through, seasons in your life that are just seem unbearable, you're not going to make it through, how do they, still show up to work? How do they still lead other people that are depending on them to lead them? Because that was one of my struggles. Like I said, I couldn't blend the two, or I couldn't separate the two, and it showed. It reared its ugly head multiple times, and really, if I don't want to say, uh, well, yeah, I'll just say it really set me back as far as my career goes. As far as personal growth goes, it was a great moment for me to learn and to grow from. But as far as my military career goes, it kind of set me back.
Right.
And But now I'm at a point, I'm good now, of course, but it was kind of one of those hard pills to swallow. You know, I
Yeah.
my my life fell apart and there I was putting it back together, one piece at a time. And
Yeah.
it was a struggle, but I still had to show up to work and try to lead people. And that's where I failed. I failed miserably at doing that. And
Yeah.
it wasn't until again becoming a equal opportunity advisor that I was able to really bring myself back into the fold, really say, "Hey, I can do this. This is something that I'm able to do." And I guess your advice for that, as far as when you're facing adversity, how do you keep going?
So first is to get the individual help, right? So like I said earlier, right? Like therapy should help you progress. Like you
Right.
might go back a little bit because you're gonna relive some things or talk about things that are gonna be hard, right? So
Mhm.
the first part is helping yourself, and that's the self-awareness part, right? To say, hey,
Right.
I need the help, and now I have to be humble enough to take advice and try some of these things. I always tell people like you got to go to therapy like at least 5 or 6 times for it to really start helping. The
Right.
first few times, everyone that goes, they're like, "Oh, this ain't working. I don't like the therapist." Like all of them. I'm like, "Yeah, dog. Like you only went once." Like most of
Mhm.
the time, the first discussion is just them getting to know you and going through your history and all that, right? Like you got to go. Like you, I started to see my brain and my mind start to change and like start like they give you tools to exercises to do and tools. And
Right.
if you practice those things, you start to see yourself change. So the number one thing is go get you got to get individual help
Mhm.
first. The second thing that I learned is when I started being transparent about it with like my platoon or my battery and like my battalion, like my in briefs for 2-6, my in brief was just my story.
Right.
And at the end of every in brief, all the new people coming to the brigade or battalion, at the end of that in brief, I always had 3 or 4 people come up to me and say, "Thank you for that. I'm going to go get help."
Mhm.
So, which in turn made me want to share my story, which was like therapy.
Right.
The more I talked about it, the more I started to understand it, and the more it was easier for me to accept that this is who I am, right? A lot of
Mhm.
times, leaders, especially very like alpha personality, strong leaders, hate the fact that they have a weakness,
Mhm.
right? And I don't want to call that a weakness. I'm just using that term. It's not a weakness. It's who you are as a person. You have this thing about you that you consider, something a flaw. When it's
Right.
really not a flaw, it's part of who you are. And if you
Right.
use that as a strength to help other people, right, it becomes something you become proud of. Like, I'm proud that I went through that struggle. I'm proud that I had to go through therapy because it made me a better person in the end because I used it for that for that reason. I use therapy for that reason to become better, right? So the second thing I'll tell you is be transparent because what you find is that if you're a good leader going through things, you have a whole group of soldiers and leaders in your formation who want to be there for you. But you'll never know because they don't know they need to be there for you.
Right.
They have no clue you're struggling. They have no
Mhm.
clue that you're going through these things, right? Because when you had an attitude or were being a terrible leader at the time, you didn't tell them why. They just thought that's who you were. Joey's an ass,
That's a good point.
right? Not like, hey, he's going through some things. Be understanding of it, right?
Mhm.
And let's see where we can help this guy. They don't know that because we never shared that with them,
Right.
right? When I started to share that, people would like walk in my office and be like, "Hey, how you feeling today? You good?" "Yeah,
Mhm.
I'm good, man. Appreciate man. You know the deal. Here if you need something." Makes you feel like you're part of a team. And
Right.
that, listen, and, if if you've ever read any type of books on culture, right? You know that feeling like you're part of a team, feeling like you belong, feeling like you're important to something or someone, a group or a person, is the biggest motivational force to counter suicide. feeling important counters suicide, right? They call it a life worth living, right? Making someone feel like they're meant to be there, even
Right.
if it's the smallest thing that they do, right? We're giving someone a sense of value, like they matter, will
Right.
counter the thought of killing yourself or suicide, right? A lot of times, mm, but people have to be involved in that process. Someone has to make you feel valuable. But if they don't know you don't feel that way, they don't know to act in a way to kind of tell you, like, hey, listen, hey, why don't you come help us with this?
Right.
So they can show you that you matter to the team, or hey, why don't we just
Mhm.
go and do this together? Right? Just let's get out the house or let's go do this. Right? When I started to open up about that, it wasn't just like me, because at that point in my life, I had been through therapy and I had like, built some tools. Now it ebbs and flows, right?
Right.
Like when I had my knee surgery, you know, I went back into depression because I felt worthless and I didn't think I was gonna be able to continue my career, right? Like,
Mhm.
and I had to go back through therapy like a lot, right? Because I started to go into that place. But my wife saw it and said, you need to go. And I was self aware enough and humble enough to say, you're right. I am going back through it, right? So,
Right.
but the second part, like I said, man, is being transparent with people about it and being okay with telling them and then being okay with accepting help. If not, no one feels sorry for you, bro. They probably like you. Like
Right.
feeling sorry and is different than someone loving and caring for you, right? I don't feel sorry for you, man. I care about you. I care about you enough to do something, and you gotta be willing to accept that help. Um, but being part of a team, man. I always tell people, back in the day, the worst thing you could like way back in the day, right, when we lived in tribes and
Right.
right, the worst thing you could do to somebody was exile.
Mm.
They would rather you cut their hand off, torture them, display them, in whatever, but let them still be part of the community.
Right.
The worst thing you could do was kick someone out of the group, right?
Mhm.
That's why bullying is so detrimental, because you literally make someone feel like they don't belong anymore, right? Like
Right.
that's hard, man. Like that is one of the things that, humans need other humans. And so when we go through hard times, we need people more than we think we
Mhm.
do. But we want to isolate,
Right.
right? We internally, the person going through the depression doesn't want to be around people because that's what your brain is telling you it's time,
Right.
right? Like, hey, go be by yourself,
Mhm.
right? Just go through it and whatever, right?
Yeah.
The counter to that is people bringing you into the group. And
Right.
no one will bring you in if they have no clue that you're going through all of that. Because for some reason, as a leader, you feel like you have to be tough. You have to put off this bravado,
Mhm. Yeah, it's
and
that.
in reality, it's the opposite.
Yeah, it's that. And I've caught myself doing that too, where I'm in charge. I have to act like I'm in charge. Whereas now I just do the approach. I definitely understand making feel people like they're valued, whatever they do. They could be just clean the latrines or the bathrooms, whatever they do, making them feel a part. And I have a soldier right now who's near and dear to my heart. He probably doesn't think that, but he is. He reminds me of a younger version of myself, kind of lost, kind of, just finding his way. And he's a good soldier. He works hard, but he has personal demons. I'm not going to mention his name, but I have taken, and it's not just him. It's but this one definitely hits home for me. So I have taken him under my wing and really I just coach and mentor, I guess, but on a deeper level, on a personal level. Because like I said, at work, he's fine. It's like model soldier, does great things. But as the moment he gets home, but I had to sit down with him and we had to talk about, I had to really get to know him. Like I have to know what's going on with this guy because I can't help him if I don't know. And he finally opened up to me, and the things he told me, it all made sense. It made everything click as to why he does the things that he does outside when he's, alone.
Right.
He's by himself. And it's gotten to the point where I check on this. He falls under me in the three shop, but he's usually kind of working, doing whatever he needs to do. He loves to stay busy, so I try to keep him as busy as possible. But at the level of the three shop, we're kind of, if you've ever worked in three, I'm sure you have. Those that don't know, that the three shop is super busy, constantly going, constantly moving. There's something always going on, falling apart. Something's on fire. You're putting it out. So I had to take a step back and say, hey, I need to make time for this individual. I need to make sure that I'm giving him the attention that he needs, because, like I said, near and dear to my heart. And he's actually, how do I say, he's making a change for the best. It's a slow process, but I feel like I'm getting through it to him. And
It is a
I've always,
process, bro.
it is. And I've always said this, and this is kind of like my mantra. I can't change the army for everyone, but I can change the army for one person. And if that's
That's
all
right.
at the end of my 20-year career, if that's all I accomplish, then that's good enough
Hey,
for me.
here's the thing, Joey. Like what people don't understand, right? Like I've told my story a million times now,
Mm.
right? Sometimes no one comes up to me at the end of it, or no one will say
Right.
anything to me. 3 years later, I'll have someone come to me,
Mhm.
and say, "Hey, I just want to tell you, like when you did the in brief, you know, I went and got some help, and like I'm still around because you said you shared your story. You don't know the difference you're making, and you don't need to know. Like you, the impact you make, you might think you're impacting this one person, but you might be impacting 35 different people. You know what I mean? And you have
Right.
no clue about it. And a lot of it is, people tell you all the time, man, like, hey, I just watched you and how you acted and how you led, and that changed who I was as a person, right? If they won't tell you that then, but maybe they see you in 2 years from now and be like, yo, like your leadership really meant a lot, right? And that's all you can do, man. Like that's the point, man. To be honest with you, you said
Hmm.
something about like adding value. I tell people the story all the time. Every time I brief, I talk about NASA, right? And then 1969, the race to space, trying to beat Russia to put a man on the moon.
Hmm.
And when you walked into NASA, and you asked the janitor what they did, or you asked the person serving lunch what they did, or the electrician or the plumber what they did, they responded with, "I put a man on the moon." They didn't say I cleaned the bathroom or I served
Right.
lunch or right.
Hmm.
That organization at that time made everyone feel like every action that was taken inside of that organization helped put someone on the moon. Think about that, man. Like the pride that comes with like, yo, right? Like even the smallest thing
Right.
helped to get to the outcome,
Hmm.
right? And we do a terrible job of that. We do a terrible job of messaging that this small action ends up with the outcome of shooting down,
Right.
TBMs or aircraft or cruise missiles, right? We
Hmm.
we have a terrible job of connecting dots to why that one action that this soldier did helped with that, right? And we got to start connecting those dots because that's where the importance comes in, right? Because
Hmm.
someone feels like they're not in the van or the TCA, they're not important.
Right.
Right? Someone feels like they just
Hmm.
set up the EPP or they just run the crew drill and then they go wait or go beyond the ECP. They're not important, right? Like we got to do a better job of showing how every action leads to the success of this organization and how that matters,
Right.
right? And that person matters, right? And NASA did an amazing job. So every time you walked in that building, it didn't matter who you asked, hey, what do you do here? I put a man on the moon. Put a man on the moon. And that's the culture you got to have. Because when you have that
Hmm.
culture, that's when all the counterproductive stuff stops.
Right.
Right. I used to tell people, man, when I was first on a Charlie Battery 4588, right? I used to tell people, like, how I knew when I had a good culture and I had the, like, me and the commander had been able to establish exactly
Mhm.
what we want that battery to be and the people to be and act and the pride. I said, you know how I knew? I said, when I walked around and I heard a PFC correcting a private and telling them that's not how we do things here in Cold Steel.
Right.
When you have a private correcting a private, you probably
Mhm.
got the culture that you want, right? That's how you knew. Like that private
Mhm.
knew, hey man, everything we do here matters. That's not how we and I heard him, that's not how we do things here in this unit. That's what that private told another private, right? That's when you know, man, like
Right.
that's the culture you gotta have where people know that they matter and every action matters, right? You
Right.
know. So you know that helps, man, with making people feel important, but it starts with being able to be vulnerable and
Mhm.
transparent as a leader. The leader has to start that, right?
Right.
The leader has to start that. Like if mm, there's a book called The Culture Code, and then the dichotomy of leadership by
Mhm.
Jocko. It's part of kind of the series there with the
Yeah.
extreme ownership. If there's some things, man, where the leader has to be the person who has to initiate it.
Right.
And you got to be okay with being the most vulnerable person in that formation, right?
Right.
And once that happens, man, people seem to open up.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's Charlie 4-5, huh? Okay.
That was my first battery.
Your first battery. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I
I've
mean,
I've never been a first sergeant or CSM of a short range air defense unit, even though I grew up short rat.
right.
I've always had Patriot and then I had that.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that was I feel like I'm learning just from learning and mentally writing all these notes down in my head because, if the time comes and whenever I ever get the opportunity, I know I can take that and definitely apply it. But I would definitely agree that being vulnerable, being transparent, allowing yourself to really be aware of the things that make you upset, frustrated, managing your own expectations of individuals, especially if you haven't voiced them, being honest with people. I think that pretty sums up self-awareness as a whole. And and I think if people listen to this and they actually take the time to listen through the whole way through, they're going to take something out of this for sure. And again, Sergeant Major, definitely appreciate you sharing your story. I'm pretty sure I heard that, but now hearing it again, it really drives the point home. And probably when I heard it back in the day, I was not really aware of what was going on or how that would later affect me. But definitely appreciate that. That was like I mentioned before, you don't really know what other people are going through. Not only that, but also understanding that you're not going through that situation alone. There are other people dealing or have dealt with those things. And it's definitely good to hear. I know I appreciate when my leaders are willing to be open and say, I'm going through it right now. And being transparent about, maybe not giving us the details, but definitely saying, hey, I'm going through right now. If you notice something, just know that I'm still here. I'm here for you all, but just understand that I'm going through something. And um, I can
Pick
appreciate
up the
that.
slack, man. Like
They
that's the
do.
thing. Like people don't want to see you fail. They don't want to see the organization fail. Like people will pick up the slack, and that's why I try to tell people like it's a team, man. Like soldiers want to take care of leaders too.
Right.
They do. They just don't know how or when, right? But if you give them the opportunity, they'll step up.
They will. I've I've often asked myself, and I try to make it a point to ask my CSM and my BC how they're doing, because
Yeah,
being in those positions is stressful. It's not an easy job, and a lot of people. I like to put myself in other people's shoes or try to kind of relate in that sense. I've never been a first sergeant, never been CSM, never been a BC, but I can only imagine that it's not easy. And who checks on them? They're
that's right.
constantly checking on us, but who checks on them? And sometimes I'm surprised by the answer. I'm not doing so good right now, Sergeant Scone. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, you want to talk about it?
That's
Usually
right.
they're usually not right now. So, and that's okay. But I like to make sure, that because I know that job cannot be easy. There's a lot of expectations. A lot of people think you're supposed to be doing something when in truth, maybe that's not the reality.
Right.
So I like to make sure that they're doing okay. And when they're not, just let them know that it's going to be okay. And if it's not, then, it'll get there. The
Right.
storms, what's that saying? The storms have come to pass. They have not come to stay. So I like to throw that out there for
That's
people.
right.
It's a little piece of encouragement. Storms come and go. They don't stay forever. And you just got to weather the storm. Um, I'm kind of running out of things here. So
No, no, man. We're
that
good. We don't gotta keep going. It's all right. I think it was pretty I
was,
appreciate you having me on, man. I do. I think it's a good conversation, and definitely willing to come back on to talk other things, outside of this, if it's leadership stuff or just, you know, lessons learned, throughout my career on things. Mm,
absolutely.
but I definitely appreciate it, and I hope, people will get something out of it. And I thought it was a real good discussion, man, and I appreciate you.
Well, thank you, Sir Major. Again, I'd like to say thank you very much for coming on. This podcast was kind of started up with my friend. I might have mentioned it before, but personal growth and going through learning about myself, the self-awareness part, just kind of, I don't know. I hit an age, like I'm 37 now, just turned 37 back in August. So I'm almost 38 actually. And something clicked in me. Something just, I don't know if it was the time to mature, if it was just that time in my life where it was like, okay, like I had already been doing really well, but now it was time to take it to another level and really dig deep to me and who I am, why I do the things that I do. And it just led me down this road of what I call my journey into spiritualism, and to just really getting to the roots, no longer putting band-aids on personal things, and really getting to the root of who I am. And uh,
Great
and
therapy, man,
it is it's been good. It's been
and it's gonna help other people in the same way. So
right.
somebody will get something out of it. So it's good.
I hope so. And even if they don't, that's okay. This is part of my, what do I say? Don't just talk about it, do it. Just do it. And that's what I started doing. Okay, let's just do it. If it's great, people watch, awesome. If they don't watch, no big deal. It's out
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Maybe they'll come back to it. Again, really, from the bottom of my heart, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and talk about it and share, parts of your life. And
No,
it's, yeah,
I
I got a
appreciate you, man. I
lot.
appreciate you, and thanks for having me on, man.
Mhm.
I
All
really
right.
do appreciate it.
Okay. Well, I think we're gonna wrap up. Oh, so we normally do a book recommendation. So before, I guess, you got anything you recommend to?
Yeah, I think based on this topic, there's a book called Resilience by Eric Greitens, former Navy SEAL, and it's the basis of it is it's letters that he wrote to his SEAL buddy who got out and started going through depression and kind of things like that, and it's really really good like discussion and kind of this like love and tough love letters, which but and then he kind of kicks ends each kind of letter with kind of a lesson learned type of deal and what it means and what he's trying to say. And so, based off of this and self-awareness and kind of what kind of the topic we had, I think that book called Resilience by Eric Greitens, I think is a good book on this one right here,
All right.
on
I'm gonna
this
have to check.
topic.
I'm gonna have to check that out. So just started my Audibles account back up. So
Yeah, buddy. That's all I do.
so build my library. All
Yes,
right, Sergeant
indeed.
Major. I think we're gonna call it there. And so until next time, definitely gonna invite you back, and we'll talk about something else. All right. Okay. Hold on just a second.